Yeah, so I think last time we spoke, we were hitting on the fact that what we call Midwest nice. And that's that at the end in the Midwest, we very much want to help. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a good mindset to have. But it necessarily doesn't always translate the best into business and when we're talking about security, because we may be helping out the wrong person, or we might be helping out the adversary at this point in time. So how do you start to train a little bit of distrust into trusting people? And that's where looking at a whole, and we'll talk more about this, but how do you start to train people to look at certain things or keep an eye on things, and kind of what can we do to help instill in our users?
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rudd, Community Director at IRONSCALES, an email security platform powered by AI, enhanced by thousands of customer security teams, and built around detecting and removing threats in the inbox. We offer a service that is fast to deploy, easy to operate, and is unparalleled in the ability to stop all types of email threats, including advanced attacks like business email compromise, account takeover, and more. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into the show.
Hey, Jeremy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Brendan. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you got a super busy schedule and we've been trying to get together for a while now, so great to have you finally here. But before we get started, would you mind sharing with our listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, certainly. So, my name's Jeremy Schwarzbach. I've been in the security industry now for about 6 years, but been in IT for, it's been probably at least 15 years, if not more. I've done it all. I've started at help desk and done desktop support, server work, consulting, network, and now I'm in the security realm and loving it, even though it is a busy realm and never ending. So doing a lot of different work these days. I was recently promoted at work, so I'm in the middle of some job changes, but mostly revolving around how do we as an organization secure our endpoints? How do we protect the servers in our environment? And now with the addition of cloud and cloud being everywhere, how do we start to look at where we're at from a risk perspective for cloud as well? So
thank you and congratulations on the promotion. So you got to share with us, what are you currently working on? What is your new role?
So the new role is going to be mostly revolving around that cloud aspect of it, of looking at that as a whole and figuring out what can we do better. And especially, I think organizations don't realize to what level of cloud they're already invested in. It may not be you hosting data in the cloud, but it might be your vendor hosting data in the cloud. So how do you wrap that around that, and how do you look at what your risk is from a company perspective when the data is kind of out of your control? It's being hosted by somebody else.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot more companies getting specialists around cloud. I'm not sure what exactly the title is called, but a lot of people I speak with are recommending to take the cloud certifications. For some reason, they don't get as much of the limelight. I'm not sure why.
I think it's just mostly, I don't want to say ignorance, but it's the fact that I don't think most company realize to the extent of what their data is up there. So we all just go in and expect that it's sitting on a server somewhere, right? But really it's in the cloud or AWS in the background. And I think organizations are also starting to see value in like Azure Active Directory, Office 365, those kind of platforms where all of a sudden it's going, well, we weren't really cloud before, but man, we are now. So we really need to get a grasp on what that looks like. So I think cloud certifications are going to be the way to go, because I think as we move through, look at Microsoft. You can now have a Windows 10 machine up in the cloud of running dedicated. So it's just going to go more and more cloud as we, I think, move on and in the industry and as we advance as a society as well.
You also mentioned that you lecture at the University of Moorhead.
Yeah, so I'm an adjunct professor for Minnesota State University in Moorhead, Minnesota. So we're right on the Fargo-Moorhead share the border. So I'm an adjunct professor over there.
Awesome. And what are you passionate about teaching?
I love everything. It's technology is a multifaceted realm, right? We've got software development, we've got desktop servers. I think what I love doing is being able to provide students an experience from somebody who's actually in the field, who's working with things on a daily basis. And that's not to say anything bad about people who just teach, because they also are very good at what they do. But I think it's very, very neat to say, here's what I see, or here's what I've done in the real world. And the one thing that I think is important to do today too is to really stress on students that they are our future. If we can instill security from them as a student, hopefully they take that into the workplace and they still consider that as they go about their daily jobs and responsibilities.
I've heard a lot of complaints about let's say, the current cybersecurity training methodology. Most of the time, it's based on theory and less practical and hands-on experience.
I think as a whole, technology or education, I'll say higher education as a whole is changing. We're hearing more and more that companies and employers want to have more hands-on work, right? Theory is great. Theory is also important, but at the end of the day, it's going to be those hands-on. How do you defend against an active attack? Or what are some things to consider during an active attack? How would you protect it? How would you move? How would you investigate? And every attack is different, but if you can have that foundational of here's things to look at, here's things to check, at least you can start from there. I would agree. I think we want more of the hands-on approach in both teaching and daily work. I mean, we're not doing theory at work. We're doing hands-on stuff.
The last time we spoke, maybe you had different things keeping you up at night at that point in time. But just for the sake of going back in time, like what's been keeping you up at night, and has that changed since you've changed your roles? Maybe you can touch on both pre and post promotion.
Well, yeah, definitely. So it's still it's still in flight. So there's still a little bit of overlap for me today. Some of the big things are just attackers are getting advanced. It's not the script kiddie anymore who's just firing a script hoping that, oh, I got caught, and then it's not a big deal. We are talking about real contenders, nation states, and real advanced attacks. And I'd say the number one thing today is really twofold, is the business email compromise aspect. So using trusted contacts. So now to try to get further access, and then also looking at how do we start to look at the endpoint and talk about not so much about indications of compromise, but indications of persistence. So how can I tell if somebody's living on my environment or living on my workstations?
I know we're going to get into this in a bit more detail in terms of your process, but you mentioned one thing that caught my attention, which I wanted to bring up again in this conversation before we get into the weeds of things. But you spoke about having some cultural challenges in the Midwest that sort of potentially to the attacker's advantage or can pose some internal challenges when trying to teach awareness and training. Can you share with our audience like what you meant by that and how you've had to address it?
Yeah, so I think last time we spoke, we were hitting on the fact that what we call Midwest nice, and that's that at the end in the Midwest, we very much want to help. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a good mindset to have, but it necessarily doesn't always translate the best into business and when we're talking about security, because we may be helping out the wrong person, or we might be helping out the adversary at this point in time. So how do you start to train a little bit of distrust into trusting people? And that's where looking at a whole, and we'll talk more about this, but how do you start to train people to look at certain things or keep an eye on things, and kind of what can we do to help instill in our users, this is what you need to check. Just don't trust you're getting that email from somebody you do business with on a daily basis. And I think for us, that's probably the biggest challenge right now, is that we have the abuse of trusted contacts through business email compromise. So we're very trusting people in the Midwest. We're very much want to help. So when we get that email saying, hey, I need this done now, we are going to get it done now. So it's instilling that little bit of a pause and asking the question of, was this real or is this not?
Thank you for sharing. And as we get deeper into the challenges that you're facing and others, of course, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges in email security that you're faced with today?
Man, the amount of just overall business email compromise that we see today is just astronomical. I think we all know that it's there. We all know it's an ongoing thing, but the amount of ramp up over the last, I'd say, year or two has been crazy. And I think as much as COVID has changed the world, I think COVID happened, and I feel like as we sent more people home and have people working from home, that we started to see more of that business email compromise, because all of a sudden maybe some companies are having to lax their security controls a little bit to get people home and to have them be able to work from home. So the number one is just that trusted abuse contact of, I do business with this person and they're sending me an email, so it has to be true.
And what are some solutions and initiatives that you've taken since folks have moved home? I guess there's less of that face time to speak with people and talk with people about the imminent dangers and what you're seeing. So what have you done to address those challenges post-COVID?
I'd say they were worse kind of once COVID started. So it's been always a thing that's been there, but we really hadn't seen the ramp up until probably right around the COVID time, where it just exploded. And if we look at the FBI stats and look at as a whole, BEC is huge right now. And it's unfortunately making a lot of money for the nefarious actors, unfortunately. But I think the couple of important things that we did that I think helped us with that is that we institute a process internally that now, if you aren't sure about something, or you have an email or a link that you're just not sure about, maybe it doesn't feel right, how do you instill in your users that they have a dedicated space to send something to? And that's what we ended up doing. So we created a process called mail abuse. And I mean, our company on average processes about 500 to 600 emails a month where they come in. And that number has just ramped up over the years as it's been available. We also do internal phishing tests, and we have 50% of our company report those emails to us. So that's a huge number. So it's been successful. And I think, too, just being in front of your users, we've got a dedicated space where we talk about, hey, we're seeing a huge ramp up right now for whatever reason over the last couple days of phishing or business email compromise. Be on the lookout, take extra steps, that sort of thing. So it's having that dedicated space, too, to just say, hey, we're seeing a problem, so please take caution.
And can you talk a little bit to why so many phishing emails are landing in the inbox in the first place? What are the tactics that the attackers are using in order to bypass all the defenses in place?
So back in the early days, it would be register a domain, right? And that lookalike domain, and send it through and hope that it doesn't get caught. Now today, what we're seeing is just the getting compromised as far as, hey, log in and I need you to get this secure message. So click here. Then you're getting that fake Office 365 landing page. So typing in your credentials and finding out, there was no message. But then what you don't realize is then the nefarious actor or the attacker is now getting those credentials and logging into your mailbox and trying to send those emails out to other contacts. So it's usually people we do business with on a daily basis that are running into problems with their emails getting compromised and then trying to compromise emails inside of our own environment.
So setting up fake new domains using similar domain lookalikes to bypass any detection, and having your vendors being compromised and then being targeted through vendor account compromise.
Yes, I would totally agree. And actually, I would say that if I had to put a number on it, I would say 95% of what we see is not the lookalike domain. It's the compromised vendor or compromised accounts of people we do business with.
If you've spoken with some of your vendors, how are they getting breached?
I mean, I can't say for sure because we haven't really had the conversations with the vendors. Typically, we just let them know. We don't get any feedback as to what. But I really think it comes down to two things. Is credential reuse is huge. When you've got the same credentials for your Netflix account as you do your work email account, you're just setting yourself up for failure at that point. And I think the other side of it is that there are great services like Gmail and Office 365 that help small businesses and small companies be able to have a real domain, right? But I think what most don't realize is that there's that multi-factor option or turning on MFA. And so I think that's where I think they go hand in hand, where it's just a lack of having MFA turned on, easy to guess passwords or compromised passwords, and that's what they're leveraging to get in. That's not to say that there may not be some where a vendor they do business with got compromised and they had the same thing happen to them as was attempted to us. I think there's also that happening as well.
What would you say are the main challenges you're faced with from an email security standpoint, going through the kill chain from pre-delivery to post-delivery?
So, I mean, our process that we use when we look at the kill chain or look at an actual email is we get it to our dedicated mailbox, and then the clock starts ticking. The thing with anything about this process is that you have to be quick with it. Your users are depending on an answer back of, can I open this email? Can I not? And if it's something urgent, they may need an answer right away. So they can't sit around and wait for 8 hours. So you basically almost dedicate somebody to that while also taking care of other responsibilities. So it's watching that mailbox, being responsive and being quick about the process. Now, thankfully, we've set an SLA of anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, and that's just to have a little bit of time to maybe we got somebody at lunch or something, or in this case, maybe it is a really bad email that we really do have to dig at and figure out, is it true or is it, I should say, a good email or a bad email? And sometimes that just takes time as well.
And that's just to determine if it's a good email or a bad email, right?
Right. Yep. So I'd say on average, our process, we can be done in probably, I'd say no more than 5 to 10 minutes, because we do rely on, we have our provider of our phishing company, our phishing testing company has a product that now they've got a button inside of Outlook. And the nice thing about that button is that it forwards all the header information to us of that original email. So now we don't have to go pull it from somewhere else or get a copy, things like that. So now we can actually start to look at the headers at just a quick glance of, okay, did this come from the true domain or did it come from a lookalike domain, that sort of thing. And then we start looking at, okay, is there a link in there? I don't want to run the link on my machine. So now I need another tool to be able to open the link, or maybe a virtual machine that's not on my network, something like that. So then you got to throw that link in there, let it run or analyze it yourself, and then make a determination of good, bad, or otherwise.
And then what is the process to remove those emails from the inbox or inboxes?
We don't have a process today. That's something that we need to probably have some improvement on. We're just relying on our end users to report it or to delete it. It's one of the things that our response rate from our company as a whole is so great, and that people are reporting emails that generally we know about it before other people do, or we can pull a report of who got that email, shoot them an email and say, hey, this one is bad, please delete it. And they do out of their inbox. If we were to get a truly bad one, we would have to involve our system infrastructure team to have them pull that email out. And we have done that in the past, but it just depends on the severity of the email. I'm more concerned about a ransomware email that's sitting in 100 inboxes than I am probably a phishing one, because I can take steps to block that URL or block the sender, steps like that, where it's a company-wide effect felt in just a couple minutes of work. So
yeah, because once you're dealing with 10, 20, 100 potentially infected mailboxes, how are you getting those removed quickly at once versus one by one? So would you say that is also one of your main challenges, is remediation?
I would say so. I think we also have a lot of tools that help us with remediation too. If it's a link that somebody has to click to download something, we'll just block the link. We've remediated about 90% of the problem, hoping that they don't change the link. That's not to say our actors aren't smart. They absolutely are. And you hope that it's the same link. You hope it's not 100 different links. There are some challenges because you got to be able to react and adapt quickly. And sometimes that can be difficult, especially if you have a whole team at lunch. Well, what do you do at that point? You have nobody who can pull that email for you.
Yeah, that's a great segue actually to a previous question, which I skipped over. You mentioned the last time we spoke that the threat actors were getting very methodical in their timing and in their approach. So I know you gave some examples of being attacked during holidays and weekends, and now you mentioned lunchtime. So has that been a common theme that has continued?
So I misspoke a little bit because I went and looked at numbers last time we talked. And for the most part, what we're seeing is during normal business hours, right? They want to try to get during the normal business hours to blend in. Because if I get an email from somebody I do business with at midnight, I'm probably going to flag that, especially if I haven't worked with them before at that time frame. But that's not to say that those aren't happening, especially when people are gone or not around. If you look at the 4th of July hack that just happened here recently, it was one of the worst times that could have happened. You have people who were just about to take their 4th of July holiday or be gone for a weekend, and you had this massive attack that I think was around, 2 o'clock, something like that. It got detected and reported on. So they're definitely relying on those opportunities where they're hoping people are gone and the key players of defense and protecting environments and the people who are going to respond to it are gone or unreachable.
CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
That makes sense. I guess it just depends on how much of a target you are and how long they've been planning the attack. So we spoke a little bit about the process, but what happens when an email comes in or is reported? Can you walk us through your process?
Yeah, absolutely. So ideally, our user clicks on a button right to report it, so it forwards us all the header information. First thing we're going to do is just look at the body of the email, see if there's anything that's odd. We just had a recent example where the text was different. So it's almost like they were copying and pasting out of a document, and the text was different. So you could see that in the email. So that's instantly for us a red flag of why is the text different? Looking at the header information to see, okay, I know this customer is on Proofpoint or whatever client they're using for email, and it came from a different spot. So that's a red flag to me too. And so from there, then depending on what the actual body is or what they're asking for, I'd say 90% of our stuff right now is either a document or a link. So now we need to look at that document and the link and see if it is good or bad. So we use a product that we can actually throw both the link or the document, and it runs it in a sandbox environment. And it does automated analysis, which is great because if there's something detected in there, it'll let us know and it'll assign it a score. I think the challenge with that process is that attackers are getting smart about that and building in anti-VM or anti-checks, automated checks. So there's also has to kind of some interaction to see what is its true intent, I should say. And so from there, depending if it's good, we'll respond back to our user, say, hey, this is a good email. You can go ahead and open at the attachments or say, if it's bad, well, then we need to look at all of a sudden, how many emails are we seeing? Are we seeing a lot of emails? The challenge becomes, especially with business email compromise, if it's somebody that you do business with, you can't necessarily block their email because they're eventually going to fix the problem. So how do you take further action? So from there, we'll block links, maybe drop attachments. We can do that as well with our email appliance, strip out attachments or block certain SHAs, that sort of thing. And then dependent on from there, if it's not a situation where we do business with them, we've blocked emails before because it's an extreme step, but sometimes in the heat of the moment, you have to stop the bleed. And then the extreme measure that we have, we just recently implemented a system too now where if we suspect or if there's an automated trigger by our antivirus, we can actually lock down a machine. And what I mean by that is that we have looked at what do most attackers use, and that's the living off the land binaries. So what we've actually done is put those all into a list and said, all right, if a machine gets locked down, you cannot run any of these binaries. So you can't run like ping, ARP, who am I? Things when you're compromised, that's usually what an attacker is going to do first to figure out the lay of the land is where am I, who am I, what permissions do I have? And that can be either a manual process or triggered automatically depending on how bad the file is.
If I heard you correctly, it sounds like, there's a mix between lots of manual forensics and using multiple tools to stitch together a process and build your own internal process for detecting and responding and remediating.
Yes, 100%. It's, I think, you still have to rely on the manual eye sometimes, or the manual process. You can automate as much as possible, and it probably would catch a majority of it, but sometimes it just takes a human to look at that email and go, hey, there's just something really not right about this.
Which brings up an interesting point, because personally, I think people tend to focus, which is not illogical, but I think people forget about the second step of email forensics and response process. So everybody really wants to prevent and block bad emails from getting in. But once they get in, this is an equally challenging problem to solve. No one really talks about the challenges on the back end. Once those users report those emails, or even if they don't report those emails, how do you detect the emails that just sitting there idle waiting to be clicked? I'm not sure if that is something that you're internally working on or trying to solve, or if you're reliant on solutions and technology to fill that gap for you.
It isn't. And I think that's the hard part, right? Is that to remove an email from an inbox does take time and work, right? I think at least for us, we've built up our tools and our processes so that we're reliant on those tools and those processes to work. Our domain blocking software, we block that link. So even if somebody clicks on it, it's not going to do anything. We've effectively killed that part of the email. So I think it's one of those things you kind of have to judge, and it's a balance, right? We can't do everything, especially with small teams or maybe not a lot of workers. So how do you find that balance of protecting an environment, but not being able to do everything? We're not Superman, unfortunately, but I think that's where we've built up those processes where we can make quick decisions, block something, and then we know that we're about 95% covered. All we have to worry about is, did they send a different link, or is it a new link, or is it a different file? Things like that our threat actors are doing today too. So we have to be mindful of that. And just because I blocked one email doesn't mean that there aren't 10 more sitting out there with different links, different documents, that sort of thing. So
that's another interesting point to go deeper. How do you keep up with the volume? So if it's, like you said, they could change the link 10 times or change the sender 10 times. So what is your process to expedite that collection of similar types of attacks? How do you get rid of, if it's 20 or 100 emails that arrive within 10 minutes apart? Like how do you deal with the scale?
The hard part is that, it's a pretty much a manual process. So if we know that there's an email and it's come in, we're going to look in, we have an archiver. So all of our email goes to our archiver. So we can look at, hey, this email did send 20 emails in. Does the link look the same? We may not check all 20, but we're going to check 15 to 18 and say, okay, we're pretty confident that they didn't change the link at this point in time, and roll with it. We're still going to validate because I want to make sure. I don't want to miss that one link. But the nice thing about our team, at least here at my company, is we're very fluid. So if a situation like that came in and we noticed a huge amount of emails coming in, or maybe we're getting reports of that, it's an all hands on deck situation. We are getting everybody pulled in. We'll probably have one person analyzing the email, one person looking at our DNS filtering software, one pulling the email, one maybe in their email appliance figuring out, how do we block it? Can we block it? Should we block it? So granted, those situations don't come up a lot, but when they do, we're very much willing to jump in to help and to protect the company as a whole as quickly as possible.
What would you say are your main goals around solving these email security challenges? Where do you see that you can make the most impact?
It's a tough question, because I feel like today we've even asked ourselves that question of, we keep getting all this business email compromise. How do we protect our users? What can we do better? Because the mail abuse process for us is working, and it's working well. But how do we prevent that from ever reaching the inbox? And I think it's a tough question to answer, because I don't know if there is a really good answer today, because we've looked at it as a whole too of what can we do better? And I mean, we could always improve, but I think technology needs to advance a little bit more, and we need to maybe look at a whole of how do we start to maybe deeper analyze emails, or look at pattern based. So we've built up this pattern for this person, and all of a sudden out of the blue, they send me a document and they never have before. Maybe that's a red flag and there's some extra analysis. I don't know what the answer is today, but I feel like having at least a good process like we have today has saved us in a lot of instances, but how can we get better? And that's a question we're still trying to solve.
I speak with a lot of guests, and I've learned from my conversations that 90% of info security challenges can be solved through process and people. But when we talk about email security, email wasn't designed with security in mind from the onset. It feels like process and people can only take you so far in securing your email. And I think that's where technology, even though most people like to push on people and process, I just feel like when it comes to email security, there's only so much you can do with people and process. And that technology, like you said, is probably the Achilles heel right now. Of course, there are great solutions out there, but until everyone starts using them, you're going to have a lot of companies struggling because I think you can only, again, get it so good with just people and process. So I'm just curious if you agree or disagree, or if you have any comments or other thoughts on that.
Yes, I would agree. I think the people and processes, like you said, can only carry us so far. I think technology does have to advance. I think on the other hand, too, though, that they really feel for these small businesses and for these small mom and pop shops, right? They are doing their best. They are acting with their customer in mind, but they don't maybe realize that a business email compromise type situation of MFA would help, multi-factor. So what I'm really kind of proud of in our community here in the Fargo-Moorhead area is that they're actually talking about that. They're talking about what can small businesses do to help protect them? So I think it is a twofold approach. I agree. I think technology needs to advance, but I think there's also other things, like you mentioned, that people can do too with the people and processes. But I'm kind of to see what the next evolution of, quote, email will be, or where the next, quote, evolution of email security is, right? Because we keep advancing, and I hope we keep advancing, because it's going to take some technology, I think, to solve the email problem.
There's definitely lots of technologies out there today that have improved on the past systems, which were primarily secure email gateways. The next evolution or category touches on some of the points that you mentioned, like studying patterns and user behavior. I wanted to ask you earlier, where do you learn how to email forensics, response, remediation? There are no courses on this stuff. There's no certification on being an email security practitioner. So where did you learn how to do these things? How do your team learn? I'm just curious to know how you pick these things up, and where do you go to teach yourself these things?
It's a hard question, because a lot of it was trial by fire. I mean, just seeing every day kind of what we were seeing and how do we get better. The mail abuse process just came up one night where I was thinking about, well, what if we had a dedicated inbox that people could send things to? Started as a pilot, talked about it. It's part of our new hire orientation now, so we highlight it so all of our new hires know about it. We've made it easier for people to submit things, and it's just exploded from there. So, now that we have the data, we have people reporting emails, well, what do we need to look at now inside of that email? What do we care about? How do we tell if it's good or bad? And I think it's just looking at those pieces and kind of working through that process of, well, we know this is a bad email. Now, what can we do to protect us? Or we know this is a good email. We can respond back and say, hey, this is safe. So I feel like, too, our team has done a really great job of helping each other out. We always ask that question of, well, what if, or maybe we should do this, or we should look at that. Our team is very collaborative. We meet every morning. We talk about the problems that we're seeing and things we can do to get better, and maybe projects. So I don't know that there's truly a class. I think it just really comes down to being willing to learn and asking the question of, well, what can we do to protect the company or be better? So
mostly it's just self-taught, on the job, figuring things out. And if you're lucky enough to get some training on this stuff, that's primarily the path to learning how to do email security.
I'd agree. In college, I took two classes. One was a network forensics class, and one was like a desktop forensics class. And it really kind of made me start asking the question. It was very hands-on, so it wasn't theory-based. It was actually hands-on, and it was very cool to step through of, here's an email compromise, figure out what happened. And so you start to look at, okay, they did click on an email. I found the email that they clicked on, found the file. I think that kind of helped open the door. But it's a lot different when you get into the real world, and especially because tactics are changing, that things move very quickly in the security world and in the technology world. So you have to be willing to adapt quickly and be able to change quickly.
Definitely what was relevant like a month ago could not be relevant today. One more question regarding email here. So how much does Dmarc play a role in your organization? And again, where are the resources to learn about Dmarc? Because it's not an easy thing to set up. It depends on how complex your company mailbox structure is and marketing operations. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit of your thoughts around Dmarc and some of the challenges you may or may not have there.
I'm smiling because we've recently tried to address some of those challenges. We've had SPF records, we've had some Dmarc and some DKIM set up, but I came into this and I looked at, okay, we started locking down to what can send into us, into Alerus or into our company as our company. Okay, who's all sending emails for us on our behalf? So that kind of led into the Dmarc DKIM project of how do we start now adding those in as approved senders. But boy, when you start talking about companies that are relying on other companies, so maybe your marketing company relies on AWS or Salesforce or whatever, and you start to look at the list of everything that you got to whitelist, and it's crazy to me. Start talking about now you can't fit it into one entry, so now you need to start doing maybe 6 entries because you have to fit that all in. And it's also kind of funny she mentioned that because at first I had no idea. I knew nothing about Dmarc, DKIM. I knew it existed, but one of those things that when you start looking at it, you go, oh, this isn't going to be that hard. And then you start doing it, and then you realize how much of a challenge it really is.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It does have a purpose, although it's not a silver bullet, of course. But I think most people will agree the more layers you have, in email security, the better.
I think it's worth mentioning too that if you're an Office 365 and that's all you have, they help you build those protections in, right? Those DKIM, Dmarc, SPF records. But for a company that has different email solutions, a bunch of different solutions for marketing, products that we use, that sort of thing. So it's really hard to have a company do it for us. Now we have to do it, and we need to find a way to make it work. One of the nice things, I guess, is that there's only so many companies out there. So eventually you should be able to cover most of them, but it's a challenge. I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges that I didn't realize going into it was how much Dmarc, DKIM was going to be to set up.
I know we're coming up on time, so I would just ask you, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything we may have missed that you would like to share before we close out here today?
So I guess the only thing that I'll mention too that I think has been great that we've been doing is that, we do adversarial pin testing. So we actually have somebody come in kind of like we are, we're either virtually or sitting across the table from somebody. They're actively trying to attack our company, and we're saying, oh, hey, we see you. Here's what we see. And, going back and forth. And I think we've done a lot of good things where we are technically started out as a blue team. I would say we're more of a purple team today now, where we know the attacks. We know what they're going to attempt against us. And we're using real world pen testers to kind of teach us. And we're also helping them learn about what do you see? What can we see in our environment? So it's really a two-way conversation that's been very beneficial. And we've been doing that now for, I believe, 3 years. And we're going to continue to do it because there's just immense value in it. And I don't know that anybody's doing pen testing like that today. I think most people it's, hey, here, try to get in. And then after the fact, you find out what they did to actually breach your network. They're authorized to breach it, of course. But so it's been kind of fun to learn and also kind of adapt our measures and our controls and our processes to what's actually people are doing out in the real world.
That's a great ending point because I'm not sure what your pen testing process looks like, but testing your email, it's also a very interesting exercise, because if you don't continuously try to look for your email security weaknesses, you're always playing defense, right? I'm not sure if it's something that your pen testing includes, but I know that it can be very valuable to do such exercises.
I think it's worth at least doing it, right? Maybe it's something as simple as testing your DLP controls, your data loss protection controls. Of somebody sends a social security number out, are we going to see it? Does it get secured? Things like that. So we do a little bit of it. I think we're going to do more of it, just so that way we can keep testing our controls and make sure. The big thing is we have all these controls, but unless you have a process to validate them or a pen test to validate them, you just hope and assume that they're working like you intended them to. So
it's like you don't know what you don't know. So you want to find out where your vulnerabilities are before attackers do. We test our users for phishing in simulations, but why not test your security controls as well? If you can prevent them from receiving 10% less emails, it's something. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. It was really interesting to hear some of your challenges and how you're trying to solve them. So thank you, Jeremy, for taking the time to chat with us today. If people would like to reach out to you and chat, what's the best way they can get in touch?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way to reach out. Feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. It's Jeremy, and then Schwarzrock is my last name. So I'm always up to chat about security or things that you're doing that maybe we could do better, or vice versa. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. We'll definitely put those in the show notes. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on CyberSecurity Heroes, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for this episode of CyberSecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.